The Soviet-American agreement to hold another summit between Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan as of the 7th of next month has been described as the #1 event on the world scene. The Daily Pravda has this to say.
Another summit will have paramount significance. If the promising prospects get action, humanity will probably take a major step toward a nuclear-free world.
On the understanding to have a summit, Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze had this to tell a news conference in Washington.
It is very important that in Washington, at the talks with President Reagan and Secretary of State Shultz, we virtually outlined the agenda of both the Washington summit and the contacts that will follow. Eduard Shevardnadze said he was convinced a treaty for medium and shorter-range missiles will be signed. The Soviet foreign minister also noted the other good trends in Soviet-American relations and announced the start of large-scale negotiations for stopping nuclear blasts.
On the outcome of Eduard Shevardnadze's visit to the United States last month, the Daily Izvestia singled out what he had to say at a news conference.
The talks in Washington proved a logical follow-up of the broad-scale process that began in Geneva and Reykjavik. Shevardnadze said the Soviet delegation was pleased with the results of the talks, even though, he said, there were still many difficult questions about Soviet-American relations, and great efforts were required to solve them.
The paper За рубежом pointed out that the first nuclear weapons agreement had to clear the way for a still more impressive process of removing the global nuclear danger. There is a fine prospect for signing an agreement with the present administration in the United States for cutting strategic armaments by 50%.
A Radio Moscow military observer notes serious Soviet-American differences with regard for the ABM Treaty. The United States administration wishes to skirt the ABM Treaty to get action on the SDI. This will send the arms race spiraling again. All this will be discussed at the Soviet-American summit.
As the paper Sovetskaya Rossiya said, the talks are going to be serious and difficult, but it is possible to find solutions acceptable to both sides. Radio Moscow presents another edition of the series Soviet Viewpoint.
Military experts of the socialist countries within the Warsaw Treaty Organization and of NATO countries are holding consultations on prospects of reducing armed forces and conventional armaments in Europe. More about this from our commentator Yuri Sultan, and this is what he writes. This problem has always been important, but it's getting even more acute today. And judging by Radio Moscow Mail, some people have misgivings whether the risk of a military clash won't increase with the abolition of the Soviet and American medium and shorter-range nuclear missiles. And agreement has already been reached practically about the abolition. These people reason in roughly this way. Nuclear arms are a deterrent, and the less nuclear arms there are, the more temptation will be for one of the sides to provoke hostilities. And accordingly, there are enough forces and arms for such hostilities. 2-3 million men-strong armies confront each other in Europe. It's claimed in some NATO capitals that the Warsaw Treaty countries have a superiority in these forces and arms. Well, the claims are false. There is an asymmetry in the types of armed forces, but an approximate parity is maintained. And this has been confirmed again and again by experts, including Western experts. The point is different, though. The NATO military quarters intend to take revenge for real nuclear cuts, to compensate for these cuts, for one, through modernizing conventional armaments, which would be as destructive as nuclear arms. The Soviet Union's stand, coordinated with other socialist countries, lies in reducing troops and armaments in Europe to such levels when the possibility of their use for offensive operations is ruled out. And this can be done, above all, through scrapping nuclear arms and through cutting the more dangerous offensive types of weapons, such as tanks, tactical aircraft and helicopter gunships. And naturally, the menace of offensive operations would be less with a reduction in the total number of troops. The Warsaw Treaty countries propose reducing the troops by 25% by the beginning of the 90s. Representatives of the socialist countries within the Warsaw Treaty Organization are making such concrete proposals at the consultations in Vienna. And one would like to hope that these proposals will be considered by the NATO countries in a constructive spirit. That analysis was contributed by our Radio Moscow commentator, Yuri Sultan.
And that ends Soviet Viewpoint, which came to you from Radio Moscow.